Welcome, everyone, to Your Little Castle Show. We have on the walls all the important fun stuff. St. Louis Browns Historical Society expert, the president, Ed Wheatley, in the building here. Ed, thank you for sticking around for another half hour.
Always glad to be here, buddy. It's fun.
And I just love talking about. I could talk baseball for months. Like I mentioned last year. If you missed the first show, everybody, go check it out. It's live on ABC one time, and then available indefinitely on our YouTube channel. Go to our Facebook page. Go to our website. I didn't even put that up last show. Let me pull that up. Here is our business website for the TV show, Your Little Castle, yourlittlecastle.com. That's where we air not 5, not 4, not 2, not 1, but 3. So I said that, I keep rotating my rings up there 3 times a week on ABC. And I like to bring in somebody from the community for one of those 3 shows every week to talk about what I want to talk about. And it depends on what that might be that week. But I reached out to Ed. I had a couple people, and I said, hey guys, Ed got back to me first. You have to wait. We're going to talk about some other cool, fun-related stuff. Dan Geeney and I ran into each other. Dan pitched 13 wins at Division I, didn't get drafted. This is what we talked about, how is it you make it into the league? What are they looking for? And then, furthermore, where do we end up with? They changed this format a couple years ago, and everybody plays. They used to play a couple American League teams. They didn't, interleague play never happened until World Series forever, and then they said, hey, a little interleague play. Now everybody plays every team in the league. It is weighted a little bit more towards your division, I guess.
Well, I think it was in the mid '90s they switched, and you crossed leagues for the first time. Up until that is you just played all National League teams, played just National American, and St. Louis had the benefit of having 2 teams, the Browns and the Cardinals, so it really helped create a cultural love of baseball because all the greats came through here. Whether you like the Browns or not, Babe Ruth still came here, Lou Gehrig still came here, Mickey Mantle still came here. They all did. Ted Williams, Bob Feller. And then you could watch the National League and all the greats there. Other cities didn't have. They were just stuck with their one team if they were lucky to have one.
If you had a National League team, you didn't get any American League teams.
But you didn't see this cross league that started in the late 90s. Now they've changed it, and there was a period in the last decade where you had your rival team, which was St. Louis, would play Kansas City more games in this interleague play.
70 series, right?
And then, some of the teams didn't like that because, like the Mets over there in New York said, well, we always have to play the Yankees. We're going to get kicked. Well, Cardinals won a lot of games when the Royals were down,
Right. Yeah.
And so that helped, especially in a couple years when you come in as the wild card,
Sure, 1 or 2 wins, you're out of the playoffs.
So you had that, and then they wanted it to be more everybody plays everybody. So, I mean, here we are starting out baseball last week. We're playing, the Twins and the Angels. It used to be you had the Cubs here for the opening days and things, and the rivalry starts immediately. And you played more games against these teams that's in your division, like the rivalry with the Cubs, and it really meant something. The hatred really was there because you wanted to beat them, and you didn't want to get beat by them. We evolved a pretty good rivalry with the Milwaukee Brewers, surprisingly. And we went to a couple NLCSs with them as well, and the same in Houston. We had those rivalries because you kept playing them so much. Now it's really diluted. And what are you going to play 6 games or so against the Cubs here at home? I mean that's just like you've lost that aspect.
Yeah, and I have a great affinity for the Cubs. It's one of my favorite teams, as I say to my Cubs friends and fans, because we wouldn't have all these World Series rings without the Cubs. How often do we get to pay the Cubs? So we thank you Cubs fans and all you Cubs guys. But yeah, I mean that's a lot of source of revenue too. I mean that rivalry. I have a connection with the Cardinals. Some people know. I've worked with a lot of different kids in the community, and I work with a lot of kids who. My specialty is working with kids with comas, just because I went through a coma. And one of the connections I have, won't get any further than that, I can ask for tickets periodically with my connection and say, hey, and I always say, I'm not going to bother the connection I have for $15 tickets. But these Cubs come in town just for a regular season game, and they go up to $40, $50 a ticket minimum. Right. And then it's like the seats I normally sit around, they're $80, $90 a ticket. So then that's when I ask my favor. But that's because that rivalry. And like the stadium is almost, I wouldn't say half filled, but sounds like sometimes
they always have a very high attendance.
People coming down from Chicago.
And not only is it filling up the stadium, it's bringing revenue into the cities as well.
Right.
That was like Angels are in town, do we have any? You know, it was great. Mike Trout is playing. You get to see him, or you know. But beyond that, what do you have? The people aren't as excited. They didn't come down. We had some bad weather too. I mean, starting these games in early, you know, the last weeks of March. You know, the weather, and you know, it used to be baseball started, you know, a week or 10 days into April was those first games, and you know, I think you're losing something when you don't have the Cubs to pick on, or you know, even the Royals more, because people do trek across Highway 70 back and forth with them.
Oh yeah, we get on a bus and ride over. But
it's really more. It becomes, if you're going to have divisions, you want to play the teams more in your divisions, because that's where you do the damage. Because you beat them, they've dropped a game. You know.
Yeah, it's that head-to-head. We're a half game out. We're a half game up. Well, if they win and you win, then nothing gains.
Right.
But if you're playing them head-to-head, that's where you can pick up games.
There's more. The games become more critical when you're playing head-to-head to win your division, and I think that's something that you're really missing. Whether you know, you look back all in the early 2000s, the Astros had those great teams, and you know, we went back and forth with them. You know, we were the wild card or they were the wild card. You know, in like 04 and 05 and things like that.
Yeah, the Killer Bees, and they share.
Oswalt and company on the mound, and yeah,
it was a heck of a. Then they go off and they hired away our general manager back up here, and then he took over there, and then all that controversy. We don't want to get in that discussion, but I mean, that rivalry was pretty substantial. And then I said, no, you guys are going to the American League. Yeah. And I'm not sure why that was. They had their financial reasons. Or
part of that was in the way the leagues were division. There were more teams in the National League.
6 in the Central and 4 in the.
So they had to adjust over to balance out the divisions. You know, and I mean, you speak of that rival. You know, that sign stealing and stuff like that.
Well, database of information, apparently.
And it was, well, the thing that was, I was just, for one of the books I'm working on right now, Harvey Haddix pitched for the one time for the Cardinals. But in 1959, he was pitching for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And what Harvey Haddix pitched may be conceived as the greatest game ever pitched in baseball. 12 innings of perfect baseball.
What?
Not a man on first. By hit, single, air, anything. It was a perfect game through 12 innings. He lost it in the 13th because the first batter, Felix Montana, comes up and hits a ground ball. They were playing the Milwaukee Braves. The third baseman makes a bad throw to first, and he kind of got shook up. Eddie Matthews bunts him over. Joe Addick hits a home run, and he
believes
loses
this history Ed knows here. This is amazing.
So, but for 12 innings, a perfect game. And the thing about that perfect game, Old County Stadium in Milwaukee had a very low outfield fence railing in front of the bullpen. And Bob Buell, if you remember Bob Buell, for the old timers will, was a really good pitcher. He sat out in center field, fastball. There's a towel hanging over this fence. You know, a curveball on that, there's no towel. Every hitter knew what was being thrown, except for Hank Aaron. He would not do it for Hank Aaron because Hank Aaron didn't want to be distracted by it. But that was a regular thing the Braves did in those days. And for 12 innings, it didn't matter that you knew the ball was coming. Harvey Haddix threw 12 innings of perfect baseball.
So let me get this straight. They're giving away the pitches coming from Harvey. And they still couldn't hit him for 12 innings. No hit for a game and a third. That's tough to get 9 innings. Now these guys get on perfect games, and they still pull them out, and somebody else finishes it, and they get a combined.
That's true. Oh, because you might wear out their arm, right?
Yeah, well, we don't want to hurt the guy.
Yeah, this guy did it. And the thing of it was, he didn't even think he was going to be able to pitch. He had a really bad cold. He woke up that morning up there. It was a cold, drizzly night as well. So, I mean, it's one of the most remarkable games pitched in Major League history.
Now, was he a sidearm?
No, he was a lefty.
Lefty, but not sidearm.
No.
I'll give a shout out to Trey Lee. Trey, if you're watching, checking in. Trey Lee pitched for the St. Louis Spikes. We had some former pro ball players on the St. Louis Spikes. Big E, Eric Walls, a number of guys. But Trey Lee threw mid-80s, but he would throw sidearm, essentially. And I'll never forget one time he came out and pitched and shut a team down. The lights went out because they got too late at the park, whatever. This isn't like the MLB. And they said, come on back tomorrow. We'll finish up the game. And Trey started the next game.
Huh?
But these guys, I mean, gosh, and imagine this guy was throwing over the top. He wasn't doing a sidearm pitch in 12 innings straight. They would never let anybody do that today.
No, they've invested so much money in him, and they got all these different theories. Is they're using too much weights, whatever. They're built so differently. But I mean, these guys would look at how many people pitch shutouts, 9-inning games. Just even whether it's a shutout or not, they pitched 9 innings. It was regular, And in the old days, when you do it and you look like a Dizzy Dean in 1934 and things, when he won 30 games, the last pitcher in the National League to win 30 games, in the old days, pitchers would do their start, and then today we hear about them doing their tossing between starts, Yeah. In the old days, they didn't have the expanded rosters. A starting pitcher would come in between his starts as a relief pitcher. That's how he would get his in-between start throwing.
Well, did they build up more endurance then? Was there something wrong? Why have they gone away from that theory? Because normally you just build.
I hear a lot of things that these guys, they're so worried about, I pitched 2 innings yesterday, or,
right.
It's a different theory. Are they throwing up in the high 90s and 100? Yeah, they're bigger. They're stronger. There's the ball players today are significantly taller. Remember in
right.
in 1968 when they lowered the mound because of Gibson?
Gibson, yeah, I was gonna say we're talking about somebody that was dominant. Gibson had like 27 complete games,
yeah,
at least, or something like that.
And
but it was 24 inches. They brought it down to 18.
They brought it down 5 inches.
Okay.
And I did a study, and sent it out, as published several years ago through Sabre, that I took all the pitchers from 1968 who led in each of the different categories in the American League and the National League, strikeouts, ERA, innings pitched. So who were the top pitchers? What was their height? And they were like 5'10" to 6'1".
Really?
Okay, so then I think I did this in 2019. I looked at who were the type pitchers in 2019. They're all, like 6'4", 6'7". We got pitchers out there 6'7". Remember Randy Johnson and all these guys,
6'7",
and Wainwright,
Yeah, 6'4".
So you lowered the mound 5 inches because you wanted to improve the hitting.
Right, give them a chance.
But now the pitchers are 5 inches or more taller. So you're right back where you were in 1968. At that angle of the ball.
Right. Well,
the angle of the ball coming
when that release point is coming from up here.
Right.
I'll never forget, I played ball with Chad Harrison. Shout out to Chad. I just ran into him at the home opener. I reconnect with everybody for the Cardinals home opener. It's the game one, sold out crowd, overflow, 120,000 people or 75,000 people downtown. Game two, 25,000 people.
Well, it was a bad weather day.
Right.
You got lucky on game one. I mean, and I always when I wrote the book on baseball in St. Louis, I opened it up with talking about and quoting Susan Sarandon from Bull Durham, how the movie opens with the bells ringing, and she says, I've tried them all the religions, but to me, day in and day out, what suits my soul is baseball, the religion of baseball. In St. Louis, baseball is the religion of our city, and opening day is our holiday. That's our national holiday.
They tried to market that as a national holiday, or at least a St. Missouri holiday. I got invited to a number of events for the big parade for Soulard. They had a let's celebrate home opener as a holiday, and they said, got to the Cardinal Cowboy on their float. Chad Harrison, I was going to mention as we get onto that. That's a great point. 5'6", could throw a 96-mile-an-hour fastball. But is that a difference? I didn't think about it. He will bring that ball 96 miles an hour or thereabouts, 91 at whatever we were doing. But he was bringing it, and he was 3 inches shorter than me. But that arm release point is down here. Is that easier to detect because it's not coming at you at an angle like this? It's coming at an angle like this.
Right.
Every millisecond, baseball, you have 0.18 seconds to decide whether to hit that ball, right? It takes 0.45, 0.51 to get from release to the plate.
Right.
My dad used to have one of those little catcher balls that had a timer on it. We release it and catch it. 0.85, whatever. But you literally have 0.18 to go from here to here.
Right.
And to make sure you connect and to put it out in fair territory and to put it in between players. Hitting a baseball is a hard thing to do.
It is, and that's why I said, they thought they solved baseball when they lowered the mound 5 inches, but now the pitchers are all 5 inches taller, and you're right back at that same release point.
You're right back. So, when it gets down to my mom, love you. They just had my mom on the front page of the
Yes,
St.
she
Louis
was.
Post-Dispatch.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
That was kind of neat. Teaching 60 years. She taught John Goodman. But she said, Carter, let me tell you about my perspective on baseball. It is very entertaining. I said, Mom, are you saying that these baseball players, we're just merely entertainers? She said, well, it's exciting entertainment, but it is a form of entertainment. And so then how do you take that, whether or not this, but then we become such, I like your word religious. It becomes a religion. Because now and it crosses all genres, all generations, all ages, all male, female, everything we've got, every gender, both genders we have, and all the stuff we got with all that. And so now we unite despite our differences, and that's why I love baseball, brings us all together.
Well, not only that, and we've done in some of my films, we've talked about how baseball brings people together, race, whatever. You're all there sitting there rooting for the home team, root. But it's interesting that you talked about entertainment, because I've written about this many times, where when baseball was first created in 1840 by Andrew Cartwright in Hoboken, New Jersey, not up in Cooperstown by Doubleday. They've proved it now. They've changed the signage in Cooperstown. And as it came west, you got to remember, in the 1840s, 50s, and the 60s, and beyond, even in the 80s and 90s, there was no real forms of entertainment. There wasn't television. There wasn't radio. There wasn't movie theaters yet.
Right.
There wasn't. But baseball became this exciting thing that it started in communities, and it started between factories playing each other in this period, and it really became an entertainment form. And then it became serious because as people liked watching it, all of a sudden, starting in Cincinnati, we started paying to keep the good guys together and have a good team. And that's how it became professional. It came from an amateur to professional because it was so popular entertainment, because what else was there to do? To go down to the park gazebo and listen to a band? People liked the excitement. There wasn't basketball, there wasn't football, there wasn't hockey. So baseball grew during all this time and evolved as teams got better. We keep them, we pay them, and then they toured, and soon you have leagues like the Major League starting, the National League in 1876.
Talk about, if you would, to the history. We're getting a little off on baseball from all angles. I had a conversation. I've got some supporters and sponsors and fun stuff we get to do in the community. And one of the sponsors said, hey, let's try to see if they'll put our show on Fox Sports Midwest. Cowboy, go figure it out. I'm sure you know who to call. I made a couple connections. They told me to call. I called the executive producer of Fox Sports Midwest. And I was like, certainly he's not going to call me back. 15 minutes later, I got a call back. He says, Cardinal Cowboy. I was interested. I didn't, what do you, he goes, we know who you are. Here's what his point was. You've decided to do this fun thing. If people know my story, I was lucky to be alive. I think baseball gave me the skills to pull a ventilator out of my own throat. That's why I do this. And we get to inspire and work with a lot of kids and fun stuff. And give everybody, never give up. I like your story with who's the guy with one arm?
Pete Gray.
Pete Gray. Yeah, man, never give up. We got played with one arm. And you can do anything you set your mind to. So that's where this came from. He says, yes, would you realize, Cowboy, that Cardinal Nation is 20 million people? Mm-hmm. According to their demographic information, because they need to study that so that they can. Baseball does advertising, right? That's how they pay the bills, and television networks. And KMOX was essentially the reason the Cardinals have grown to where they have 8 states, effectively, I think is what he said, that we are known in. And Cardinals are like the 4th biggest franchise in terms of audience in America.
And that goes back to the 20s and 30s and 40s when, the first radio broadcasts evolved around 26 for radio and baseball. KMOX, I think the first game was 26. And you got to remember, baseball at that time, in Major League Sports, if you say, here is St. Louis, and then you go from St. Louis kind of up north to Chicago, turn to Detroit, and then head to Boston, come down to Boston to Washington, and then back from Washington to St. Louis along the Ohio River. That's all Major League was. St. Louis was the farthest west.
Yeah. Okay.
The most southern, and you had this great, powerful radio station that could hit the West Coast and the East Coast, all the way into Canada and all the way to the Gulf of Mexico.
KMOX was going that far?
Yeah, they have their
wow.
power
50,
was that strong.
Whatever.
Watts. Yeah, but it was, people then would listen to it, like during the Depression and all the Hoovervilles and you'd see people, no televisions. Remember what we spoke about a moment ago? Yeah. They listened to baseball. Franklin Roosevelt in 1942, January 42, right after Pearl Harbor, it was like, we shut down baseball. We did in World War I. he says, no, we're going to have baseball. It's going to take a lot of hard work to win this war. People are going to work long hours in the factories. I want you to come home. I want night baseball. I want you to come home, sit with your family in front of the big radios. You've seen the old pictures. The radios are about this big, this high.
Right.
And people are staring at it. You've seen it on the Waltons. Remember when that TV show? They're staring at the radio, right? And you had great guys come out as announcers like Harry Carey, who painted the picture for people.
Hey, everybody.
No. The pitcher toes the rubber, looks in, checks the sign. Here's the windup, the stretch, the pitch. So you're sitting at home, and you're seeing that in your mind because you're seeing everything that's happening. And you're like sitting, you've been sitting at Sportsman's Park. So it really came, so people became glued to St. Louis baseball, be it the Browns or the Cardinals. And then when they did take a vacation, guess where they came? St. Louis.
Want to check it out?
They used to joke about, you could go out, Costas used to joke about this, going out in the parking lots and how many different states you could find in cars at the parking lot because so many people from the South, from the North, from the West came to St. Louis because that was their tie to baseball. Because that's all baseball was. Everything else was shoved in this triangle up to New England.
And we talked about that in our pregame prep. We do a little discussion between innings. Ed and I can talk till 5 in the morning.
Yep.
We started out at about 6:30. I was a little behind getting prepped for my last stuff I had. Ed politely waited here for a few minutes. Thank you, Ed. Yeah. And then we started talking, and now we're up to 9 o'clock, and we're not even done with our second show yet. But I wanted to do two shows. We talked about St. Louis as a historical city.
Yes.
And how it is. I mean, 1904, World's Fair. I think at one point the second largest.
Fourth largest city in America.
Was it fourth? Okay, fourth largest city.
In 1904 it was.
In 1904 it was. But I think at one point it was number 2 in the country in population, maybe before or after that. I don't know. Check me on that, somebody. Google search me. There we go. And then whatever changes, Disney decided I understood Disney had a little discussion with Anheuser-Busch about doing Disney here or not, and they said, fine, we'll go take it to Florida and St. Louis, and then they went to Chicago with some other stuff. But at the point, anyway, St. Louis became the center for almost all sports. We are a sports city through and through, more than most people realize. You were giving me some stats I didn't realize.
Yeah, I mean,
boxing, bowling. Talk about that if you would.
Well, St. Louis, like I said, at the turn of the century, there was the fourth largest city in America. There were some things that happened with railroads and where they crossed, but we were still the gateway to the West. There was, Chicago was trying to get things routed through them and things, But as far as a sports town, there really isn't a city in America. You can have cities that are bigger like Chicago or New York or Boston, but none of them, and I've written a book about special moments and memories from America's best sports town. We are the best sports town. So many things were created here, St. Louis, soccer's really big now. St. Louis was the hub of North American soccer. It was the capital of North American soccer. You go Google it right now, it says Kansas City, and everybody will tell you, that's crazy. We had stuff with soccer at the turn of the century.
Family and
the things, all the things.
That world championship team that lost to England or beat England 1-0. That was the game of their lives. They made a movie. Like 8 of those players were from St. Louis.
Yes, 6 of them. Yeah,
6 of them. Okay.
And but all the different club team championships. Kansas City, they say, if you Google it, is a mistake. Bill McDermott, the great soccer analyst and things. We just joke about that because it really is St. Louis. No one has the history we have. We were the hub of and capital of North American soccer. We were the hub of American tennis. The greats came here and they played in the Armory and they learned. And there was something about the Armory's floor and the lacquered wood, the way it jumps. Jimmy Connors, the Golden Girls, Butch Buckhold, Chuck McKinley. They all played. We were the hub of that. We were the world capital of bowling. Yeah. During all the 50s and early 60s, bowling was the rage. And Team Budweiser, the Buds, Dick Weber and Ray Bond and Don Carter and that whole crew, they were the rage of the whole country and world with their bowling. Professional wrestling was all centered out of St. Louis with Sam Muchnick and the great show Wrestling at the Chase, which a lot of people say it really stimulated the efforts that then got turned into the WWE when Sam retired. We had 4 Major League Baseball since Major League Baseball was created in 1876.
Does that go back
4.
Perfectos?
Well, no.
Or who were the teams?
In 1876, when the
Cardinals?
Major League was formed, they were the St. Louis Brown Stockings, 1876 and 1877. They got kicked out of the league for gambling and game fixing issues, which was gambling was prevalent in those days. So they got kicked out in 1877.
Wow.
There was another team that took that name, Brown Stockings, and formed the American Association under Chris Von der Eye, a beer. He owned a tavern and he was a beer distiller just up from where Sportsman's Park is at Grand and Dodier. He liked baseball. He was a German immigrant, and people would always talk about how great baseball was. And he got, hey, maybe I can make a lot more money selling beer. So they created the American Association because at that time the National League was not in St. Louis. So the 10 years of the American Association, St. Louis had the best team, and they constantly won. And they actually played a championship series after the season between the American Association champion and the National League champion. St. Louis is the only team to have defeated a National League champion, and they won 4 American Association championships. Well, Major League Baseball said, we got to compete against these guys. Look at the love of baseball. So they created the St. Louis Maroons in 1884.
That's right, the Maroons.
They lasted 2 years and could not stand up financially because everybody loved the American Association. Why? Because they were winning. They were winning all these titles. But they also played on Sunday, and they served beer and liquor in their stadium. So everybody went to there. So what happened was the American Association team, they shortened their name to the Browns. The Browns are like a cat with 9 lives in baseball history in St. Louis. And they were so good, the National League says, if you can't beat them, join them. So they invited that Browns team into the National League in 1892. And that's the team we know as the Cardinals today. But from 1892 to 1898, they went by the term Browns. 1899, new ownership. The Robeson brothers bought them. They changed them to the Perfectos to try to change the image. That lasted a year till they changed their uniform colors to a lovely shade of cardinal red.
There we go.
And from thereafter, they became the Cardinals. So, the Cardinals have also now, instead of saying they started in 1892, they're saying they started in 1881 with the American Association. And then in 1902, the Browns came. They were moved from Milwaukee when the American League was created in 1901. Those are the 4 teams in the major leagues from St. Louis.
Is there anyone on the planet who has more historical knowledge about sports in St. Louis, at least? I mean, I would say than Ed Wheatley here, everybody. Emmy award-winning producer, historian, and president of the St. Louis Browns Historical Society. Check out their Facebook group and check out the website. And you can see that's it. Yeah, at the STLBrowns.com. I saw you at the Cardinal game first, and then I saw you at the induction of Kurt Flood into the St. Louis Hall of Fame.
Leadership of the St. Louis Sports Hall of Fame as well.
And this guy's just a wealth of knowledge, and we just appreciate you coming in here.
Always glad to be here.
I want to talk to you about some more stuff. We've run out here. We'll talk football. And are we ever going to get an NFL team back in?
I don't know. We've had people. Do people realize we had 4 NFL teams in St. Louis? 4.
We'll talk about that soon, too, everybody. Giddy up.